My name is KP Patel. I am the North Pacific Regional Ambassador. Welcome to Don't Give Danger a Key Card to your property. I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Tina Patel, Managing and Operating Member of Fairbrook Hotels LLC, which owns and manages multiple hotels and is currently in development of 2 other properties. Tina also serves currently as a chair for the AAHOA Educational and Professional Development Committee. Please give us a warm AAHOA welcome to Tina Patel. Thank you.
Thank you, KP, for the introduction. I am happy to see so many of you here in the audience today. Actually, that was my line, but I think people will still be coming in, so let's hope. It shows that you care about the well-being of your guests and your employees, and that you want to make sure you're doing all that you can be doing. As hotel owners, it is our responsibility to show a reasonable amount of care to our guests and to our staff. We have a great panel here today who are highly experienced and knowledgeable in safety and security. Our first speaker is Charles Witherspoon, a retired undercover PD and is currently a consultant with Witherspoon Enterprises. Charles will highlight the importance and benefits of building relationships with local officials. Next is Brettmann, Executive Director with Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking, otherwise known as BEST. Mar will help us to understand and learn ways to combat human trafficking in our hotels. For a national approach, we have Deputy Harry Jimenez from Homeland Security, who is on the front lines of fighting human trafficking. Our next speaker, Ron Thomas, President of United Insurance Agencies, will look at safety from the insurance perspective. Ron handles all the areas the other speakers represent, but can offer insight on how it will affect your bottom line. Let's get started with Charles. Charles, can you tell us more about why we as hoteliers should build relationships with our local officials?
In one answer, it's probably the most important thing you should be doing, but I have a question. How many of you are hotel owners? Good. Hold up now, stay with me. Now, let me ask this question. How many of you have a relationship with City Council? I want you to look around because this is important. Okay, put your hands down. How many of you have relationships with your local PD? Okay. And how many of you have relationships with the city manager's office in your city? There's the problem. It is critical. This is the most important thing I'm going to say because I only have 5 minutes and I can't teach you everything I know in 30 years in 5 minutes. But what I can tell you that's most important is that you have got to develop relationships with those 3 resources. Let me tell you why. Because if you build a relationship with them, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in just a moment, you will be able to maintain your business and not be harassed by the police, by code enforcement, and the city manager's office. Folks, what I did in Charlotte was I started about 15 years ago as a detective, investigating hotels and motels as a result of criminal activity taking place on their property. And as a result of that, I probably closed down in Mecklenburg County alone probably over 65 hotels. Those 65 hotels were closed because no one had a relationship with them. And here's what happened. I began to take a look at how we were really affecting the economy in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I realized that we weren't affecting it in a positive way. And I met a gentleman in Charlotte, North Carolina, by the name of Jay Patel, and he happens to be in the audience. Stand up, Jay, just a second. Jay came to me. I met him in the gym, told him who I was. We had met at some other functions, and he said, Charles, we've got to be able to do a better job. I said, well, what do you want to do? Immediately, we began to build a positive relationship, and I started bringing city manager's office to the meetings, the fire department, the police department, code enforcement. And I started bringing all the people into the room that they needed to hear from and people that they could actually reach out to on a first-name basis and build a positive relationship. Folks, let me tell you something. We're probably only closing down maybe 1 or 2 hotels every 3 to 5 years. And that's simply because those hotels in Charlotte are the ones that, of those folks just do not want to participate in what it is that we're asking them to do. I think my 2 minutes is up, so I'm going to stop right there. Relationships, relationships, relationships.
We just heard about how local relationships can help our business. Let us dig a little deeper and hear about what we can do to help our business. And Mark can help us with that. Mark, can you please elaborate on human trafficking and how it is affecting the hospitality industry?
I'm happy to, and I just want to say I always love being in AAHOA events and AAHOA meetings. I find myself so inspired by the people here who have worked so hard to build your lives for your families, create better lives for your children by just hard work. And at the same time, as I'm here, I also think about the kids who don't have the opportunities that your children are going to have, and that they become vulnerable to this crime of human trafficking. As one survivor of sex trafficking said, I had to do things that no child should ever have to do. So there are two types of human trafficking. I just wanted to talk about both. I'll talk about one briefly and a little bit more about sex trafficking. But the first type is labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into work or services. And it's different than human smuggling, because human smuggling is a consensual act. They're taking somebody across a border. Once the person's across a border, they're free to go. With trafficking, once they're here, they're forced to work, forced or coerced to work, and the trafficker is earning tremendous money off of their victims. So just yesterday at this conference, I was just talking to a colleague of yours who said, oh, I know someone who was just prosecuted in my hometown. He's a hotel owner, he's a religious man. I don't believe that he actually was engaged in labor trafficking, but he just caught up in something and he's now in jail. So this can actually happen to hoteliers and in hotels. In the next few months, we're going to have next few weeks, actually, we are putting an online training module up about labor trafficking on our website, bestalliance.org, so that you can learn more about labor trafficking. Sex trafficking, the second kind, is the use of force, fraud, or coercion, so you hear those three words again, to compel a person into sex work or prostitution or the making of pornography. It also can be when an underage person, a minor, is being prostituted or involved in commercial sex work. So it may surprise you. I've talked to a lot of people here, and I think you might be surprised to hear that a lot of sex trafficking victims are actually from the US. Someone on my board, his daughter was living in Atlanta, was trafficked in Atlanta, and this is very, very common that the majority of trafficking victims are sex trafficking victims are from the US. And what makes it trafficking is not that movement across borders, it's the buying or selling of somebody, which exploits them, or if it's the buying or selling of a minor for sex. So people often say, oh, you mean like the movie Taken? And while that is one example of sex trafficking, that is really, really uncommon, as I'm sure the deputy will tell you. What we see more often is that a person, a boyfriend, romances a vulnerable person, a young woman, and convinces her to come away with him. And then he starts pimping her out and exploiting her. So it looks a lot more like a domestic violence relationship than it looks like kidnapping. So you probably won't find somebody chained up in a motel room. Another myth is the age of people entering prostitution. The average or typical age of entry for a child into prostitution is between 13 and 15 years old. King County last year, we had a 10-year-old and 3 11-year-olds who were recovered and connected with services. And then if you have adults in your hotel who are prostituted, the chances are that they started as trafficking victims. Even if they're not currently being pimped or trafficked, they probably started that way. And once you get started, it's very, very difficult to get out of this life and the cycle of trauma and violence. Another myth is that you may think, okay, sex trafficking can never happen to my children. And I know parents of survivors who think that and who thought that at one time. But if you're like me, you're frightened about what's going to happen with your teenage children, and who they're going to hang out with and who's going to influence them. So what we really need as a community is for everybody to watch out for our kids, including our hoteliers. You may also say, well, that would never happen in my hotel. In King County, King County, Washington, we did a study looking at sex trafficking crimes, and we found that 63% of those crimes hotels were somehow involved in, hotels were used for, And those involved hotels across the spectrum. The economy motels in the outside of town, luxury hotels in the heart of Seattle and Bellevue, business hotel in Bothell, a nice hotel in a tiny town called Puyallup, Washington. I mean, it happens across the board. And it basically happens wherever men will buy. And in our area, and which is probably typical nationally, it's predominantly white-collar business people who are buying kids. And because this crime is tied to so many other crimes, it's the right thing to do to help prevent this activity, not only for the kids in our community and the women in our community, it's also the right thing to do for your business. So the crime poses numerous risks, which we'll be talking more about, but the biggest one is the safety risk. You may have heard about the hotel in Portland, four-star hotel downtown Portland, where a young woman was found murdered in a stairwell. She was a trafficking victim, and she was probably murdered by the buyer. But you can imagine if a customer had walked into that stairwell, or if an employee had walked into that stairwell. I mean, think about the safety risk that this kind of violent activity can pose to guests as well as to employees. The second risk is a risk of reputation. So who wants a news helicopter flying over the top of their hotel? Anybody? News helicopter? No, right? Nobody wants that. That's one extreme, but it's also the other side of, somebody putting on TripAdvisor, hey, people were knocking at the door next to me all night long. What's going on? Or just complaints on TripAdvisor. So it can create risks for reputation. And then also it creates legal risk. From a civil perspective, employees, customers, or victims can sue a hotel for damages. You may have heard about the victim in Pennsylvania suing the hotel where she says that she was trafficked at age 14. Or the criminal liability. So properties, as Charles had mentioned, have been seized. Employees and owners have been prosecuted. So it's a smart business decision to protect your hotel from this property. It's also just the right thing to do for kids and vulnerable women. And so I'm going to give you 4 ways what you can do. First, train yourself and your staff. Best developed training for hotels, working with experts from law enforcement, victim service providers, hoteliers, and survivors. And then AAHOA sponsored BEST to put this training online so that we could make it available for your members. And that came out of the Northwest chapter thanks to Arvid and Alkesh and Tina, who I'm not sure if they're here today, but they really were championing this training to be able to come out to our members. So from a legal perspective, your staff can be held liable if you should know that the activity is taking place. And if you get the training, then you'll have the knowledge to be able to protect your property. And what is that?
How are they proving we knew or didn't know about it?
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney, so I would say ask your attorney, but when I sit next to attorneys who answer that question, they say it's what a reasonable person should know. So if a reasonable person was looking at a situation, what should they know? So that's how knowledge, I think, is measured in those sorts of things. Good question. So if you get training, you'll be able to protect your property. And if you can't afford to pay for any reason, please come talk to me. We want this training out to your members. So we're more than happy to work with you to find a solution. Second, so the first one was get training. Second one, know the indicators. We have indicator cards which are out on the table. We have indicator cards for housekeeping, front desk, front of the house, and food services. So grab those indicator cards. We have more downstairs. Take as many of those as you want. We also have posters just out on this table to be able to post in the back of your hotel just to remind your staff about what to do. Third, have a protocol for responding. Sometimes hotel owners are really nervous about calling law enforcement because they don't want their hotel to get sued by a victim or someone who they called on if it was a false negative, if it's a false positive, right? They don't want somebody to come back and sue them if they're wrong. So we get asked that question a lot. Again, on our website, we have resources to be able to, we answer that question of how do you protect your property from that. And then fourth, follow your local labor laws. So in summary, you're a business person and you know that it's the right business decision to protect your property, to protect your assets. And as a parent and as a human, it's the right thing to do to protect our children and vulnerable women in the community. So I encourage you to get trained and find out what you can do to make a difference on this crime. Thank you.
Mar, thank you so much for the great information. As hoteliers, it is very important and our responsibility towards our family and our communities to not only pay attention to the signs of human trafficking, but to also do something about it. Deputy Harry, please let us know about human trafficking from the perspective of Homeland Security.
So let me start with trying to connect what Charles and Mark were talking about. What we look at, we have and I actually have one here. Please, before you leave, go in the back and get one of these cards. They're pocket size, they have indicators, they have posters. I also invite each one of you that throughout the country, Homeland Security Investigations have 221 offices. So there's more than likely, there's a Homeland Security Investigations office close to you. Reach out to that office and tell the agents, you want training, you want to partner, you want part of the Blue campaign. If you don't feel comfortable talking to Homeland Security Investigations, talk to your local sheriff, talk to your local PD. You can actually Google Blue campaign, and you can download a lot of indicators, a lot of information. This is available on the net for free. The red flags for human trafficking are specific. Throughout the years, what we have seen, specifically nationwide, is the movement of the criminal element from the centers of the cities, of the big cities, to utilize hotels in the smaller towns, in the outskirts of the city. Why? Because the law enforcement presence is less. So the patrolling is less. The possibilities of a smaller hotel owner or a worker during the week, late at night, to be calling the cops is going to be less. So they know that. So what they're doing is they're moving their businesses, they're moving their operations to the outskirts of the city. So echo what Charles was saying, talk to your local law enforcement, make that partnership. Be there, be present. When you're looking at runaways, you see in the news, any state, any city, any newscast, you talk about runaways. The first 48 hours of a runaway are the most dangerous. Within that time frame, many of these runaways, like Mar said, U.S. citizens, fall prey of sexual exploitation. So if you in your hotels come across the possibility of what's so-called runaways, that is an indicator. That is a possibility that that person may be in danger, may be already being pimped or trafficked. Mark mentioned that this may look like a domestic violence. Why? Because many times the person that has been abused and trafficked is the guerrilla approach. They get beaten, scared, they cannot talk to anybody. So teach your personnel, your staff. It's not normal. We're a very open country and a society. So it's normal for people to cross each other in the hallway and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. But when you have somebody that avoids that eye contact, when you have somebody walking and being held, thank you for playing with me, being held by the hand and not allowed to talk to somebody, that's an indicator because they don't have a voice of their own. Many of the victims are unable to self-identify and they're unable to reach out for help because they're scared that they're going to take a beating. The other part of this is the possibility that the pimp have moved this individual to be dependent on drugs. So now you serve, you're sexually exploited, I'll get you your drugs. And Mar mentioned something very important. Each one of us, we have children, and each one of us have given our children this. The internet is accessible through any of these smartphones. Throughout the smartphones, we can access at least 12 different social media platforms. There's a grooming process where the predators will utilize social media to groom the victims, to offer them attention, to offer them a way out from the strict parents, from poverty, from too much work. I'll take you away. I'll make you my wife. We're going to have a future together. And once they're gone, I need you to prove to me that you love me. Now you have to sleep with this person. That's on the sexual exploitation. But then you have the possibility of somebody coming to you with a contract for cleaning, for services. And probably you have one person doing all the talking, and the workers, once again, may not speak the language, may be from a different country, may not have a ways to talk to you, and they're always under surveillance. That might be a contract that is utilizing forced labor. So think about those red flags. It's a short time, but please reach out for your local law enforcement and your local Homeland Security Investigations Office. ASAC Brian Vicente, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, is in the back. I'll be in the back after the presentation. You can talk to us, and we're glad to help. Thank you so much. Ron?
Deputy Harry, that was insightful. Thank you. Now let us turn this over to Ron to share best practices to ensure safety and security and how we can reduce our liability risk.
Well, thank you, Tina. Boy, we've heard some great things today, and each one of them is vitally important. And when I was thinking about this, I tried to bring it down to a business perspective, and that's hard to do, but it's reality. And many insurance carriers, their policies will have exclusions in the policies from liability. And as Mars said today, that the owners or operators, they were held responsible for the activities at their property. And knowingly, your liability insurance carrier could exclude the coverage. And I think that the victims were even bringing action against the owners of the property. So that's certainly extremely important. And when we talk about training, and that's what I've heard 3 times, and being connected with the local authorities, again, that's just a small part of risk management. You really have to set yourself up for a loss control program. I know many of you have multiple properties, different areas, different states, and sometimes it's very, very hard to do that. And I think if you're not doing it, you need to really look into a loss control program, and you appoint someone at your hotel to be the person in charge of that, or the champion of loss control. And when we talk about loss control, we talk about, of course, training for all your employees. Have meetings. Get the training that these folks have talked about, and have those folks trained. And don't do it just once. You know, stay proactive at this. Let them understand why they need to have training. And when we talk about liability, we also talk about slip and falls. Number one liability issue in the hotel business. There are many, many lawsuits that come from that. We also talk about situations where you have employees injured at the property. And if there's criminal activity, frankly, your employees are at risk as well. So not only is it extremely important for your guests to be safe, it's the same importance for your employees, and you owe that to them. When I hear about communicating with the local fire department, the police department, extremely important. Charles and I were talking beforehand, and it made a lot of sense. You know, if you don't know where to go, you need to find out, because it's not just the easiest thing to do to find someone to help you in these areas. So that's part of loss control education as well. What else we need to talk about when we talk about best practices on loss control? We have I put together a handout, a two-pager, and really it's specific to the hotel or hospitality industry, and developed by loss control representatives of an insurance company we've partnered with. So they have spent a lot of time to develop this, and I urge you to pick this up and have it. You can pick off 2 or 3 things out of that might make the difference. And when we come down to the business perspective, the bottom line, and I mean, you are in business to make money. That's what makes the world go round. That's what entrepreneurship is about. A loss-free business, especially a hotel, product availability is very, very easy to come by today. Terms and conditions are good. Pricing is good. But I got to tell you, in what we do daily is we develop insurance programs for hotel management companies, individual or multi-location owners. And when you have a track record of liability incidents and workers' comp, any of these claims that insurance carriers have to pay out on your behalf, then at the renewal, they either provide you a non-renewal or the negotiations for better terms or conditions become almost impossible. Your terms and conditions, your exclusions, they become more. The insurance carriers are not excited about insuring a property where they could lose money on. So your premiums are going up, your deductibles are increasing, your terms and conditions, they're going away, so the broadening of your insurance goes away. Instead of having 1.5% of your gross as a good rule of thumb for your insurance costs, now we're talking 2, 5, 10 times. The availability sometimes is not even there. If your property is known as a particular property that's had problems, the word gets around in the industry. They know, because if you shop out or we market the insurance, other carriers see this year after year. So I don't want to make light of the 3 speakers because they outweigh what I'm doing here. But from a business perspective, these are kind of the things that I see that relate to this.
Thank you, Ron, Mar, Deputy Harry, and Charles. This really got me thinking, and I'm sure members in the audience have questions for our experts. So please take advantage of this opportunity to address any questions you may have with our highly experienced panelists. We're going to go ahead and open up the floor to Q&A. So please, we welcome any questions that you may have. Go ahead.
Can you tell us about what type of hotels are more often targeted economy, scale?
I think we both have a piece of that. Yeah.
So from my side of the house, there's no rhyme or reason, any. What we have seen nationally is the movement of going away from the high brand hotels, Hilton's, Embassy Suites, the big chains, because the big chains have more loss prevention, more cameras, more surveillance, more security. They're more aware. So the criminal element is moving to a smaller type chain or single owner hotels because you may or may not have a patrol at the parking lot. Another patrol throughout the night through the floors. You may or may not have a security with 24 cameras looking 24/7. Charles?
So from a law enforcement perspective, there's something we call broken windows concept. And what that talks about is the condition of the environment, the condition of your business. And if the condition of your business is in a poor state, from a visual perspective, you can expect to see criminal activity developing around your property. The second thing that I see from a criminal investigation perspective is pricing. I thought that was really interesting when I was investigating these cases. Anything below $50, I could always find a problem hotel. Under $50. If it was not $49.99, under $50 for whatever reason. When I ran the numbers, it was always those hotels that had that kind of pricing. Anything above $50, even the condition of the property didn't have any problems. So pricing is a big deal. It's a really big deal. I have to say this really fast because Mara talked about it and also Harry. Listen to me. When you experience violent crime, such as human trafficking, when law enforcement comes and you do not have a positive relationship with them, they are going to come after you with every single thing they have. And what I mean by that is not only are they going to attempt to take your property, but they're also going to attempt to charge you both federally and from a state perspective, because that's what I did, because I didn't know who I was dealing with. And it wasn't until after I met Jay Patel that I really realized that there were no relationships being built within this community, and I didn't like that. And immediately, once we started building those kind of positive relationships, those kinds of things began to subside. Yeah, we're going to still come and investigate, but you're no longer going to continue to be a target. But when you fail to act, like Mar has asked you to do, when you fail to be productive in society in terms of helping law enforcement stop some of the things we're seeing going on, especially human trafficking, you're going to be held accountable. So pricing, number one, and the condition of your business in terms of how it looks, number two.
I just wanted to make a quick comment as well. In our study in the King County, Washington area, which I think is reflective of what's happening nationally, I think what these two are describing is sort of where the traffickers are and where the trafficking is sort of festering. But because it's buyers who are driving this activity, it is still happening in the high-end hotels. I mean, it's still, the girls are going to the high-end hotels to meet buyers because the buyers are calling them from those hotels. Traffickers may not be keeping the girls in those hotels, which is, you know, they would want to make as much money as they can, right? So, but the girls and the boys are still going to those higher end. So it is, we've seen it happening across the board. So, so I just wanted to add that perspective as well.
Can we repeat that question? Sir, you had a question before. About
So it sounds like you guys are touching base on a lot of these smaller properties.
Yes.
Mom and pop run properties. How are some mom and pop operations supposed to stay in touch? Charles, you mentioned that we get targeted by law enforcement and vice versa. I mean, sometimes it's hard depending on the area. You can't charge more than $50. I mean, that's just the reality of business.
Yeah.
How is a mom and pop property supposed to be compliant to do what we can on the same side still make business? Right.
So, and I think I have the answer for that, and Harry touched on it earlier. It's what I call all eyes on deck. What I mean by that, every single person that works on your property has a responsibility to be a part of security. They have to see everything. And here's the second thing. When they see it, they have to act upon it. Because what happens is we see things, all of us, and we just, if you're urbanite and you see something, you don't call the police because this is what you say. Somebody else will call. Well, you have to train your employees to ensure that when they see something and when their instincts lead them to believe that something is not right, they need to act. And the only thing I want you to do is to pick up the phone and dial 911 and say, something is going on, it doesn't look right, would you send an officer over here, please? And immediately, what that does for you is, number one, is it protects your property, because now we know, from a law enforcement perspective, that you call the police and you're not trying to hide anything, and they get a chance to get involved early. I think the thing that bothers me about human trafficking is, under these, I've done investigations where people have told us that they've seen these kinds of things taking place, and I thought that's what it was. And then my next question is, well, what did you do? Their answer is nothing. So all eyes on deck, everybody needs to be involved, and everybody needs to make sure, from housekeeping to landscapers, to make sure that when their instincts lead them to believe that something is not going right, to simply call 911. Let the specialist decide whether or not something needs to be done or not. Does that make sense? Okay.
And let me, you also mentioned, you asked about knowledge. How is it that these hotels have been charged with knowledge? So, in a minute, let's put it this way. Red flags. You have a customer complaining that in their floor there was a room that there was people coming in and out all night. Were they drinking? Were they just youngster partying? Maybe. Could it be something else? Maybe. We go back to eyes on deck, all eyes on deck. The in and out. Somebody dropped somebody at the front They walk in, being either a high-end or economy hotel, and the individual goes and park and waits. Walks like a dog, sounds like a dog, might be a dog. Just go out there, get that training for free that is provided by local law enforcement here in Bexar County. I'm now with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. We are establishing a human trafficking unit. So anybody from the area of Bexar County, we provide that training. We do a walkthrough, we help you, we provide you that for free. We do a walkthrough, we help you identify vulnerabilities, we show you some of the red flags, and we build that relationship so when you call, we can help you. It's that knowledge part. A person with average intelligence, that's what the law says. A person with average intelligence, that's me. And I'm not that smart. So, that help?
I have a question. So is there any things you have to say on 911 call? Because a lot of times in the big metropolitan city, they don't even want to come to your property.
Where are you from?
Magic words you have to say when you call 911 for them to come out.
Yeah, the magic word is that you build a relationship with the organization before you call. So if you haven't built that relationship early on, you're going to have that problem. But I'm coming to you. I'm going to answer your question. So, but your question is there something special? No, you simply need, 911 is about suspicion. Something's not right. And if your police department is not responding when you call 911 because something is not right, there's a bigger problem. Now, let me finish this. So here's why, in the beginning, I said, I asked the question, how many people have a relationship with the city manager's office? Number one. Number two is, how many people have a relationship with the mayor's office? I want to throw that one in there. I don't know if I said that. Because here's the deal. They are going to hold those folks accountable for when they don't do what you ask them to do. This is the way I had to build the nuisance enforcement strategy team in Charlotte. So I got all these people in a room after hearing all of the questions that you had, and I said, here's what we need to be able to do in order to help this community thrive from a business perspective. And if we don't help them thrive, we're going to close down every business, every small hotel in Charlotte and in Mecklenburg County, and that's not the right thing to do. So we developed that team. Now when they call 911, you'll love this. There's 16 divisions in Mecklenburg County. Each division has 2 law enforcement officers responsible for that community. So if you were to call in Charlotte after we built this great relationship, there's going to be a point person that is going to come and see you from a community policing perspective and that is going to address your needs. That's how that works. But here's the thing. For you, in the city that you live in, we don't have a relationship because they won't even come out from a 911 perspective. So that's an issue for your county commissioner. That's an issue for your mayor, and that's an issue for the leaders, city council members of your city. And if I was you, I would immediately be putting my hotels together into a symbol in a room. That's what we did with Jay Patel. We brought these leaders to the room, and we allowed you to fillet them, literally. And I promise you, by the time they got back to the office, they filleted somebody else, and it just trickled on down. And then eventually, we brought people into the room that were prepared to do what needed to be done. Does that make sense?
In a way, it does, because I know all my law officers in my area by name, but that's not who you call. You call 911. And when you call 911, the relationship doesn't work, because, I can know my mayor, I can know everybody in the city, but that would not help when you're calling 911. And what I mean by that is a lot of even the law officers, they never call 911. Call the 911 and you'll find out what happens sometimes, especially if you make a call saying, hey, there's a lot of knocking and in and out of the room. You know what they say? Call your manager.
Actually, Charles, I have a question. How do we start building those relationships? What do we do first? How do we get that going?
As a first step, if it was me, this is what we did in Charlotte. Jay Patel actually called me. He put several hotels in a room, and we had what's called a safety meeting. And from that safety meeting, we brought in the chief of police. We brought in the key personnel from the city, such as neighborhood business services. We brought in the mayor's office, city council, folks from city council, and we listened to what you had to say. And then after we listened to what you had to say, we went back. They came back to me and said, Charles, what do we need to do? And I said, we need to create a task force. And we'll call that task force the Nuisance Enforcement Strategy Team. And what that strategy team does is when you have a problem in Charlotte, North Carolina, those are the folks you called. But also I want to add on something that you just said. In Charlotte, North Carolina, if you're a hotel owner, you don't have to call 911. And I'll tell you why. Because you call the police officer that works that area. And he knows exactly what to do. So we're past all of that. Well, sometimes you can fold a letter 10 different ways. You have to figure out what the best way is. But for us, what works in our county and what works in our city is, again, relationships. Here's the deal. I don't want to have to call 911. It's like calling Verizon when something's going on with my iPhone. You know, you get the standard response. I don't want a standard response. I'm past that. It's about relationships for me. I want someone to come and make me feel good about why I purchased my iPhone. And if I need a new one, give me a new one, and don't give me any, don't give me any flack about it. Well, the same thing happens in Charlotte with the police. I don't want to call 911. I'm going to call the point person that's responsible for human trafficking, who's responsible for dealing with building and standards from a zoning perspective, who's responsible for how big and how wide and how long my sign can be, so that I make sure I'm doing the right thing from a policy and a zoning perspective. So if you don't have those relationships, those are the kinds of things that's going to happen. And if you don't have them in your city, you don't have to wait on me or anyone else to develop these relationships. You can do this yourself. And the first thing you need to do is just get those people on the phone. I promise you, they work for you. They will listen to you. If they don't listen to you, then you need to make sure you go over their head. But in Charlotte, there's something called an emerald complaint. And an emerald complaint is the highest complaint you can receive in the city of Charlotte from a nuisance perspective or anything else that's going on. And when the mayor sends it out to his different departments, folks, let me tell you something. Something has to be done. It must be addressed, because he's not going to be one that tells you he's going to get back with you and then doesn't. Because you know why? In 2 years, he'll be up for vote again. And if he doesn't respond or she doesn't respond, guess what? They're not going to be in office long. So utilize those powers that can really, really help you. And I understand it may not be working and it may not work in your city, but you won't know if it doesn't work until you actually try it.
We can probably take one more question, but let's see how it goes. Go ahead.
I just have a quick statement. I work for the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association, and we have a very large initiative for anti-human trafficking. And we get the same question a lot, not necessarily because people can't get a hold of law enforcement, but sometimes because they're afraid to contact. And isn't there also a national hotline for human trafficking that you could also use as a backup, so you at least feel like you've made another, I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but I think there is one.
Yeah, it's 888-3737-888. It's on the posters that we have out there. So yeah, that is another option. We've done some study around liability for hotels, and what we have found that it is better to call law enforcement. But if you're not getting, just because of liability protections, but if you're not getting a response, then yeah, calling the 888 number is great.
Go ahead.
I just have a comment. You asked the question that how do you create relationships? So every county in the nation has a leadership plan. I want to make sure every one of you in the hotel district send one person to that leadership class. When you go to leadership class, what you say is so true. You meet the chief of police, you meet the chief of fire department, you meet the judges, and everybody. So all these people know that you are engaged. And I'm telling you, if you are not, you'll be in big trouble. Because this happened to me about 8 years ago. This was in the Christmas time. In the Christmas time, and I was beautiful information. And there was a drug thing in that particular Christmas time was going on. I was out of the country. And the police department has some kind of a data in the computer, find out that some guy is going to sell the drugs to some hotel in some place and coming to the door. But whatever. So the police department came to my hotel and whatever they did, they arrested the people. But 2 weeks later, when I came back, the police chief came to me and said, you know what, Mr. Doc, if I was not there, if I didn't know you, if I didn't know your manager, we actually can shut this hotel down. Not only we can actually shut this hotel down, we can put your manager in a jail. So I'm telling you, what this captain is saying, the police department is so true. And the only way to not only get out of trouble, but the relationship is important. And it just happened, I have my real cell phone number in my cell phone. And I'm telling you, we need you. Because we have to engage with that.
I just want to, he said something that's critically important, and I think I said two things. I'm going to add a third one. And that is, if you are a hotel owner, please do not be what I call an absentee owner. There's nothing worse than to investigate a hotel and for me to contact the owner in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he's in Canada, and I began to tell him what's going on, and this is his response. Well, I didn't know. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter. Because I'm going to charge you, the manager, and everybody, and then shut the place down and take your business, and then try to, and my attempt will be to put you in front of a federal judge and lock you up, and I don't even know you. If you're an owner, and that's not to threaten you, it's just that's the most severe thing that can happen to you. You have got to be involved. Your managers and your general managers have got to keep you informed in terms of what's going on. And when they tell you what's going on, you need to move with a sense of urgency. You do. Because every time a hotel is investigated, it's documented. And once they begin documentation, and we're the best at documenting, when it's time to take you to court, we have you. Because we can tell you exactly when we called you, we can tell you exactly what we said to you, and we can tell you exactly what you did not do. You have got to respond, owners. And if you have a manager who's not doing his job, you need to fire him or her immediately, because they're representing you and they're representing your brand. And there is nothing worse than to get a brand that is identified with being involved with criminal activity. That's important.
I wanted to go ahead and thank our speakers so much. Thank you so much today for coming in and doing this. It was a good session. And they're going to stick around for a few minutes if anybody has any additional questions.